which is why my government emphasized literacy and numeracy at the grade 4 level. We made it a national priority. We moved the literacy rate at grade 4 from 50%, which we took it, to in the region of between 85 and 90%. Since then, things have floundered. But the government of the Jamaica Labour Party is now commissioned to review our entire education system to ensure that our children get equal access to good education at all levels of the education system, to enable them to not just regurgitate, but to enable them to think critically and be creative and productive citizens.
Dr. Peter Phillips, your rebuttal.
It's clear is that after 4.5 years, the government has still failed to do the simplest thing, which is to utilize up-to-date modern technologies in the school system. The tablets in schools have not been delivered. There is still too many schools who do not have access to internet services. Overall, the government has failed to meet the challenge to deliver better educational opportunity in the schools. And I think they must be held to account for that. Now, after 4.5 years, they are beginning to look at a commission to deal with education. Not good enough.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Marjorie Gordon of Nationwide News Network has been working the social media beat, and she has a question right now.
Thanks, Irvin. Now, on social media, Omar Yard wants to know, if you become the next Prime Minister, will you have fixed election dates and term limits?
And that question is to you, Dr. Phillips.
The country needs to explore this question of fixed election dates. We are prepared to move down that track and develop the legislation. I would point out that this was a commitment that the current government gave before this current term. Nothing has been done in that regard, as they have failed to act also on the question of impeachment or the provision of job descriptions for ministers. The failure to provide job descriptions for ministers has resulted in the worst wave of corrupt behavior and thievery in government that this country has seen in its entire post-independence.
Mr. Holness, you have an opportunity to respond to that question as well.
Fixed election dates remain an aspiration of this government. So too are our commitments regarding the development and the execution of a grand referendum. As it relates to issues such as job descriptions. You know, not many persons would know this, but our cabinet at each retreat requires each minister to develop a work plan, which I personally review, monitor, and evaluate. And in addition to that, you may not know, but we have put in place a training system where our ministers participate in training in public affairs management and training in good governance. So we have done far more than a job description on a piece of paper. We have put that into action, and you have seen the results. I stand here on a platform of performance, of delivery. He has been saying all kinds of things about the government, but he cannot say that this government has not delivered, even on things which they started and did not complete.
Thank you, gentlemen. And we now take our first break in this national leadership debate. Please stay with us. for tuning in. We'll begin this segment with Dion Jackson Miller of the RGR Gleaner Communications Group, directing her question to Mr. Andrew Holness of the Jamaica Labour Party.
Mr. Holness, on August 9, the Ministry of Health announced another COVID death and 20 new cases. August 10, 8 new cases. August 11, 16 new cases. That's the day you announced the election. You ignored it was not a campaign. We saw photos of you campaigning in Trelawney and Mandeville and Eastern St. Andrew with crowds around your vehicle, and it wasn't until we saw the numbers spiking alarmingly that you finally suspended campaigning. Mr. Holness, do you deserve to be Prime Minister again, given that at such a critical time for the country, you chose to prioritize politics over public health?
We would never do anything to place the lives of the Jamaican people at risk. The pandemic will only end when there is a safe and widely distributed vaccine. This may be between a year and a half to 2 years, according to some experts. This would be well outside of the constitutional limits to call an election. Jamaica is still considered to be one of the countries that has managed the pandemic extremely well. And in fact, we have one of the lowest mortality rates worldwide per capita. Let me take this opportunity to offer my deepest condolences to the families of those who have lost someone to this terrible disease. We should note, however, that the definition of a pandemic is that there will be spikes. Indeed, even the countries that have sought to have strict lockdowns for a very long time, for example, New Zealand, they have had a spike. Jamaica is not the only country to have decided to go ahead with an election. And there's very good reason why governments do this. The truth is that what we have learned for the last 4 or 5 months in managing the pandemic is that we must go on with our society. We must go on with our economy. We must go on with going back to school. We must go on with going to the market. We must move ahead with our society.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holness. Dr. Phillips, your rebuttal.
I think the most disturbing thing about the recent handling of the spike in cases is the disregard that has been given to the scientific advice of the medical personnel. In the period of the Emancipendence celebrations, the recommendation was made that there should be a tightening of the arrangements, the curfew arrangements and the other arrangements. That was ignored. The consequence has been devastating on the people of Jamaica. Yes, there will be a pandemic, but there's no need to ignore proper advice. There's no need to ignore common sense. And there is every need to protect the people of the country.
Thank you very much, Dr. Phillips. Dion Jackson Miller has a follow-up question for Mr. Andrew Holness.
Not talking about calling the election, Mr. Holness, don't you think that campaigning in the way you did facilitated the spread of the virus?
Absolutely not. Indeed, what I did as Prime Minister, I acquired over 500,000 masks, and I personally distributed over 80,000 masks. Wherever I went, I made sure to play a public service announcement, giving directions to persons how they should operate and how they should behave. Listen, Dion, the truth is, even points being made disregarding the scientific advice. We are now in the phase of the pandemic where the society has to learn to live with the disease.
Thank you.
The government has put in place all the measures necessary to ensure that it is safe for the people of Jamaica to campaign, and safe to vote, and safe to go to work and do business.
George Davis, your question to Dr. Peter Phillips.
Dr. Phillips, a few months ago, the nation prayed as you took time off to deal with cancer. As you continue your treatment and recovery, how should Jamaicans reconcile the status of your health when considering whether to vote PNP so you can be Prime Minister for the next 5 years?
Well, the first point I would make is that my treatment is over. I am cancer-free, and I thank God for that opportunity. At the present time, I think we have to recognize that what I am called upon to do is to operate with the best of my ability, to give of myself, as I have done at every stage in my public service career. I come here with clean hands. In an earlier phase, I had the opportunity as a very young man to coordinate the construction of 10,000 houses in Portmore. I had opportunities subsequently to establish the JUTC, to establish the route taxi system. I have subsequently had opportunity as a more mature person to rescue Jamaica's economy from the chaos in which it was left by the then JLP administration in the period 2007 to 2011. Now I am prepared to give service again as long as the Almighty permits it and my health enables it. And as of now, my health is in perfect condition.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Your rebuttal, Mr. Holness.
Well, I'm happy to hear that the leader of the opposition is cancer-free. The truth is as well, my hands are clean. I have worked hard. I have presided over the construction of 22,000 housing solutions and more. I've had the opportunity to be Minister of Education, to really make profound and fundamental changes in education. As Prime Minister, I'm also a minister, and I have presided over the construction of more roads in Jamaica than any other government in the recent history of Jamaica, including completing projects that started under his administration, which they didn't complete.
Thank you.
So I can't see why
Thank you,
we
Mr.
would want
Holness.
now to come and make a case.
Marjorie Gordon is on the social media beat, and she has another question.
Thanks, Durban. On Twitter, they're asking, if you form the next government, what concrete steps will you take to protect the watershed areas, especially since drought conditions are exacerbated every year?
Mr. Holness.
Thank you for that question. We are the party that have taken the greatest steps to protect our environment, including our watershed. And the one I want to point out is what we have done in protecting the biggest watershed in Jamaica, which is the cockpit country. We are the political party that took this matter by the scruff of the neck and made it possible. We got it done. For decades that dithered under previous administrations, we got it done. And we will continue working with our international partners. I personally have taken a lead role in climate change matters, and we have been receiving great support from our international partners through climate change funds and other funds to protect our watersheds and to create a government that is responsive and resilient as it relates to the environment and natural disasters.
Thank you, Mr. Holness. You also get an opportunity to respond to that social media question, Dr. Phillips.
I think Jamaica owes a debt of gratitude to former Prime Minister Portia Simpson Miller for having established for the first time ever a ministry with responsibility for climate change. This is one of the big challenges of our present period, and we ought not to become confused. We must be definitive about not permitting mining in the cockpit country, for example. We need to act decisively to protect the other areas of watershed and to ensure climate resilience along our coastlines, our waterways, our rivers. This is the most important challenge now, and we need to mobilize the entire country to deal with it.
Dion Jackson Miller will now direct her next question to Dr. Peter Phillips.
Dr. Phillips, frankly, it's been wonderful seeing two brilliant women leading the government and opposition sides in the Senate. But drill down deeper, and you said there are only 2 of 8 opposition senators that are women, that's 25%. 4 of 13 government senators that are women, that's 30%. Politicians talk a good game, gender equality. But here, when it's completely within their control, they don't deliver. Win or lose, Dr. Phillips, would you commit to nominate a slate of at least 50% women to the Senate?
We have said that we believe that there needs to be at least 50% representation, both in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. But I think we also need to understand that there are many factors that impede women's participation. The support for child care, for example, in the House and Senate, and generally is one such factor. The fact that women carry a greater share of household work is also another factor. So actually getting the right level of representation is going to take more than just a commitment. We're going to have to deal with all of these other factors that really impede women's full participation. We are committed to dealing with those factors in the People's National Party.
Your rebuttal, Mr. Holness.
I think it's a simple thing that you can do, which is to ensure that in your recruitment at least, you have more women. We have done that in the Jamaica Labour Party. We have been deliberate in going out and seeking to recruit women. And now we have more female candidates representing the party than ever before.
Thank you, Mr. Holness. Dion Jackson-Miller has a follow-up question for Dr. Phillips.
Yes, Dr. Phillips. Respectfully just asking for a yes or no. We have an entire country of wonderful, capable, professional women. You would only need to find 4 if you're in opposition, or 6 or 7 if you're in government. Would you commit to a slate of at least 50% that you nominate entirely within your control, sir?
I thought I said so. It is a yes.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. George Davis, your question now for Mr. Andrew Holness.
Mr. Holness, given the different ways in which you've dealt with ministers embroiled in scandal, Royal Reed sacked, Dr. Wheatley resigned, Darrell Vaz at OPM, J.C. Hutchinson at OPM, could you tell Jamaica the things a minister has to be involved in to be summarily removed from cabinet?
The discretion to remove a minister from cabinet is entirely in the hands of the Prime Minister. And indeed, that would range from non-performance, dereliction of duties, lack of accountability, lack of responsiveness, and breaking with policy, breaking cabinet, the secrecy of cabinet. There are a host of things as it relates to impropriety, malfeasance, misfeasance, or corruption. Firstly, I have to be satisfied that there is enough, even without an independent authority investigating and pronouncing. I would have to satisfy myself that there is enough. Once I'm satisfied, I will act. Further action sometimes require that I await the pronouncement of independent bodies that are authorized to make definitive statements on corruption. But generally, the public would see and would know that I have acted proportionately and appropriately to address issues of impropriety, issues of lack of accountability, issues of corruption.
Thank you, Mr. Holness. Dr. Phillips, your rebuttal.
For 8 months after the issue of Petrojam came up, the Prime Minister failed to act until Mr. Wheatley removed himself from the cabinet by resignation. There was no action taken against Royal Reed until we in the People's National Party raised the question. The following day, Reed was removed from the cabinet. Now there are a number of ministers who have been found wanting, and they seem to have become part of a holding cell at Jamaica House. It reflects a lack of commitment to the principles of anti-corruption, and it reflects a failure to be bold and decisive in showing leadership to the country.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Marjorie Gordon of Nationwide News Network has been combing through the throngs of messages on social media, and she has another question.
Yes, Durban. Now, Rupert Francis, he wants to know, how do you plan to reduce Jamaica's demand on importation and focus more on local production?
And that first goes to Dr. Phillips.
You know, one of the striking things about the present administration is that despite the previous administration having reduced $300 million of the country's food bill, it has risen again to in excess of 1.1 billion US dollars or thereabouts. We believe that an important part of the reduction of our import bill centers upon agricultural transformation. And we are committed to doing this by ensuring, first of all, that our farmers, especially our small farmers, get better advice from RADA, that they are given titles for the land, which enables them to become mainstream participants in the financial sector, and that they are also assisted with marketing, both in CARICOM and internationally. We think that there is tremendous scope for enhancing our export capability, beginning with agriculture, but including other areas such as our creative sectors, for example, and in the digital economy. Jamaica can do better. We will do better under PNP administration.
Thank you very much, Dr. Phillips. Mr. Holness, your opportunity to respond to the
Quickly,
question.
when I listened to Dr. Phillips speak, it's as if he just came to the stage. Dr. Phillips has been there for more than 2 decades. And so these problems have existed for a very long time, and they have done nothing. The truth is that the Jamaica Labour Party government, in its first year, created MICAF, the Ministry of Investment, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries. Why? Because we recognize that agriculture requires investment and technology to transform it. What has happened since? We have managed to attract the interest of businessmen into agriculture that are making massive investments. Case in point, Innswood, where over 1,000 acres have been put into production in potatoes and other things, which will be effectively reducing our import bill. We will replicate this 100 times over, but not just for the big investor. These projects also include the small farmers working in conjunction with big capital to deliver significant output. They talk, we get it done.
Thank you, Mr. Holness. Please stay where you are.
of a temporary Chief Justice, causing nearly 100 judges to sign an unprecedented protest statement. Given these attitudes and actions, how can Jamaicans trust you to implement policy and law in accordance with our supreme law, the Constitution?
I think once the courts have ruled on a matter, there is no question about my respect and compliance for the rules of the court. I've been involved in several court cases. In fact, in groundbreaking cases, including the first case under the voiding of elections. The facts are that many of these issues were not clarified in law, and these cases have clarified them in law. And I respect our courts and follow their rules with great respect and consistency.
Thank you, Mr. Holness. Your rebuttal, Dr. Phillips.
The sad truth is that in all of this, particularly in the NIDS matter and in the matter of the appointment of the Chief Justice, it could have been avoided. We pleaded in the Parliament at every stage with the government and the Prime Minister to say simply, why don't you put this to a joint select committee so that it can be discussed in the way that Parliament was intended to discuss far-reaching and controversial legislation. It is reflective of a pattern of arrogance in the conduct of the government that they refuse at every point to just heed common sense and goodwill.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. George Davis, your question for Dr. Phillips.
Dr. Phillips, on each occasion the Holness administration announced a state of emergency in a location, they stated explicitly they were doing so on the advice of the police and the military. Since you have said repeatedly, SOEs are not the answer, will you reject any recommendation to declare an SOE in any area if you form the next government?
We can never say that you will never have an SOE anywhere, but I think it needs to be made very plain that the security forces are subject to civilian direction, and therefore it is going to be the judgment of the administration as to whether constitutional rights are to be infringed upon and what circumstances would require this. It cannot be any other way.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Your rebuttal, Mr. Holness.
You know, the discussion regarding rights must always also focus on the rights of the many families that have lost loved ones to criminals. It must focus on the rights of people who are locked in their communities, cowering in fear because of criminals. The state must act, and it must act decisively, protecting the rights of all its citizens. This government has done so. We have made massive investments in security, where our security architecture was disinvested for many years. And we have asked our police and military to do a job for which they were ill-equipped and ill-resourced. We have now found a very good strategic approach.
Thank you, Mr. Holness. George Davis has a follow-up question for Dr. Peter Phillips.
Yes, Dr. Phillips, based on what you said in your answer, the leadership of the JCF and JDF and the recommendations of SOEs to the government, and since SOEs are not your preferred prescription, will you then seek to replace those leaders upon taking office and have people more aligned with how you'd want certain recommendations made?
No, the question of replacing individuals is not that of any particular government. The Police Service Commission has the responsibility for the appointment of a police commissioner. The Defense Board has responsibilities in respect of a Chief of Defense Staff. These positions are not to be politicized and acted upon whimsically. But I think we have to make it absolutely clear that they are subject to political direction, civilian direction.
Thank you. We now have another social media question. Marjorie Gordon of Nationwide News Network. Marjorie?
Joel on Instagram wants to know, Durban, what two major digital digital reforms do you hope to accomplish if you become Prime Minister?
Mr. Holness, you get the first opportunity to respond to the question.
I'm glad that question was asked. The leader of the opposition mentioned the government's eagerness to get the NITS bill passed. And I've seen where the opposition has used its role and function in Parliament to prevent important pieces of legislation from coming to fruition. The NITS is the foundation of us building a digital society. They stopped it. Another critical part of the development of a digital society is to ensure that our young people are properly trained to articulate and participate in the work opportunities that will come from the fourth industrial revolution. We plan to develop and build 6 STEM schools, which will focus not just on science and engineering and mathematics, but on coding, which is now a new language. It has always been, but we have not embraced coding as a language. We will build a tech city in Portmore where there is tremendous skills, and we will from that move that tech city into parishes of St. James and into St. Mary and Elizabeth. We will get the young people of this country in tune with the fourth industrial revolution so that we will not just be mere consumers of technology, but creators of technology.
Thank you, Mr. Holness. And now, Dr. Phillips, your opportunity to respond.
Let me point out once again that the People's National Party did nothing to stop NITS. It was the courts of Jamaica. The Prime Minister's approach to this matter reflects an arrogance and disregard of the role of the courts, which is quite frankly unbecoming of anyone. Now let me say this. Simply put, there are many things that we should do. We should be digitizing all our school records. We should be digitizing all our hospital records in the country. We should be digitizing all our public records, our titles office and all of these other things. That can be done, and it can be done quickly, and it is something we are committed to. It will enhance the efficiency of the overall administration of the country.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. And Dion Jackson Miller also has a question for you.
Dr. Phillips, Port Antonio, February 19, 2016, you were then finance minister and you called the JLP's 1.5 tax plan a, quote, desperate attempt of people who want power, end quote. Now, you're the one in opposition with a manifesto full of promises. Given that many people left the finance debate still confused about this, can you explain for us in very specific language how the PNP would fund its giveaways in a post-COVID economy?
I think it is very clear, and we make no apology for the fact that in the face of the COVID pandemic and the economic impact it is having, a devastating impact on the lives of so many families, so many people in the informal economy, it is absolutely important that the government of the country throws a lifeline to these people. And so we have no apology at all about, in fact, putting a people agenda at the center. It is also the case, as has been recognized by the entire Parliament, that in the face of the economic fallout from the pandemic, we are going to have to loosen some of the fiscal rules. It is the loosening of the fiscal rules and the introduction of some degree of deficit financing that will enable a lot of this to be done, as well as the reprioritizing of some expenditure. When we give support to big business operations, everybody thinks it is reasonable. We think that the ordinary Jamaican people need to get support to survive COVID-19.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Your rebuttal, Mr. Holness.
You know, Durban, Master Tom called me before I came to debate, and he said he was reading Peter Papatax Phillips' manifesto, And in that manifesto, he was caught by the promise of $48,000 per year per household. And he said, let me check that. And that worked out to about 200 billion Jamaican dollars. Master Arm said to me, tell Papa Tax Phillips that me may poor, but me no fool.
Thank you. $200 million.
Thank you, Mr.
In
Holness.
Not true.
George Davis, Sportsmatch Scene TV, has another question for Mr. Holness.
Mr. Holness, in your 2016 manifesto, you sketched a 10-point plan for effective crime management and security to, in your words, make Jamaica a safer, more peaceful, and more prosperous society. Despite listing 47 points of achievements in this manifesto, there is nothing, no mention of anything that has been achieved to make citizens feel safer. Is this tacit acknowledgement of your party's failure in this regard?
Of course not. Thank you for the opportunity to bring up all our successes. You know, there's been no other government that has repaired and built new police stations like this government. There's no other government that has provided mobility, and more than that, equipped our fleet with tracking. There has been no other government that has equipped the JDF with the capabilities to manage our domain, not just our land domain, but our exclusive economic zone at sea, which is very important for creating the blue economy. There has never been a government that has increased the manpower, the size and capability of both security forces to be able to increase presence in your community. You just need to ask the people of Mount Salem, the people of Greenwich Farm, the people in Augustown, how that expenditure of security and increased presence, which the opposition every time in Parliament calls for, we have done it and we have delivered. We know that crime is not a flip of the switch, but we have made the investments necessary to see to the long-term and sustainable reduction in crime and make Jamaica a peaceful society.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holness. Your rebuttal, Dr. Phillips.
I think we need to recognize quite fundamentally that the murder rate is higher over the 4.5 years of the current JLP administration than it has been in the previous 4.5 years of the People's National Party administration. The strategy that they have been pursuing has not worked. And beyond that, they failed to try to grapple with the need to build a national consensus around this matter. We begin with mobilizing the people to accomplish great things, and crime control is one.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Marjorie Gordon has been sifting through the teeming and rising numbers of responses on social media. What question do you have for us right now, Marjorie Gordon?
Well, Damarni on Facebook, he wants to know, what are your plans to reduce brain drain or retain skilled and qualified Jamaicans in the country?
Dr. Phillips, you get the first opportunity to respond.
I think, you know, the critical issue is where we started, control crime. One of the things that makes our young people and others want to leave is this overwhelming sense of insecurity that they have. The other issue is to be able to provide access to the basic necessities of life, like housing, like better jobs, higher paying jobs, which is why we are fundamentally committed to building a new economic structure that moves beyond the traditional structures. Agricultural transformation is one area that we have pointed to. The rise of the creative economy, music, fashion, design, drama, leisure industries are another important element in this. Digitizing our country and reducing the digital division that will enable a much more productive economy overall is yet a third area in which we want to be very active in this regard. All told, we will prevent the brain drain when people have an opportunity to fulfill their hopes, dreams, and aspirations right here in the country of their birth.
Now your opportunity to respond to the same question. Mr.
Well,
Holness.
let's talk about how we get that done. In our manifesto, we have made a solemn and firm commitment that we will reserve 10,000 houses for young people under the age of 35 at 0% interest rates and full mortgage to achieve. This is a very serious commitment to the youth of Jamaica. Housing is a very important investment that people should make at the start of their lives. I also want to say that our young people are looking for jobs of the future. We're qualified Jamaicans for the traditional jobs, but we must also seek to provide the new jobs in artificial intelligence, in animation, in knowledge services. And we will do that with the creation of our tech park. We have seen signs of growth in the BPO industry. The BPO industry is still operating at pretty much the primary level, but we intend to partner with all the stakeholders to increase the value of the services that they're doing so that there are diversified opportunities there for our young people, not to have to run overseas, but to come here, stay here and work.
Thank you, Mr. Holness. It's time to take another break in this national leadership debate. Please stay with us.